Welcome back to another episode of AI FISEC Today, the physical security industry's first and only podcast dedicated to uncovering the mysteries and opportunities around AI and the physical security industry. I'm your host, Don Marone, and today's episode will explore security robotics. I'm pleased to introduce Jeffrey Slotnick, an internationally known enterprise security risk consultant with over 28 years of experience. Jeffrey is a peer-reviewed thought leader and change agent, and he focuses on all enterprise security risk management facets, including quality management programs, risk vulnerability, threat assessments, emergency response planning, business continuity planning, physical security, system master planning, design, and integration. As a curriculum developer and master trainer, Jeffrey advocates for quality professional development and training of security, law enforcement, and military personnel. He's a former member of the North American Board. He's a community vice president for ASIS International and a faculty advisor for the University of Phoenix Bachelor of Science in Cybersecurity and Security Management degree program. Now, let's dive into the conversation with Jeffrey to learn about security robotics. All right, welcome to the podcast, Jeff.
Welcome. Thank you. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you.
We've got a really exciting topic for the audience today to talk about robotics, right? And obviously robotics is right in line with artificial intelligence, is right in line with the physical security industry because these things live in the physical space. I'm super pumped. And I ran across Jeff on social when he had a lot to say about robotics. And coming off of the intro that you just heard, I want to give Jeff the opportunity to talk about his background, things he's working on, and what it is about robotics that he's familiar with and that he can engage with us on this conversation. Now, we'll have a series of questions we'll go through, but we'll just start off that way, Jeff. And so tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into robotics.
Well, instead of focusing on robotics, let's talk a little bit about technology because that's really where this journey started. I was an early adopter of technology.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't write 10 lines of code if my life depended on it.
Yeah.
But I am a user of technology and can envision how technology can be used. I'm a senior practitioner in the security space, security management, physical security. In my prior life, I was a United States Army engineer, retired a first sergeant and later a command sergeant major. Army engineering is where I first got exposed to tech. So my first piece of tech was of business tech was in the 1980s. The Army gave me a Hewlett Packard 151 handheld programmable calculator, and it had a single chip that you could put in it, and that chip was for bridging calculations. It saved me 20 pages of algebra, and all I had to do was input the data, and it did all the calculations for me. It was a game changer, right? My first home tech, believe it or not, was a Commodore 64. The Commodore 64 was one of the first home computers. I ran on Commodore language. That's when I learned that I couldn't write code. They gave you a sample code to get your computer to say hello and your name. And it was 10 lines of code. And I kept putting errors in there. And I decided I would never be a code writer. But I thought I was standing in tall cotton when I had a cassette drive, right? And then from a cassette drive, I moved to a 5.25-inch floppy disk.
Nice.
And then I had dual disk drives, and I was writing databases and things with my Commodore 64 and using it for word processing and many other things. That was my first exposure to technology. And then as technology continued to grow, I went through the IBM 186s all the way to the 486s and DOS language on up to where we're at today, Windows 11. So it has been a journey, but I always saw technology for the tool it was. Back in the early 2000s, I was doing, still do today, one of our core business processes is very comprehensive risk, threat, and vulnerability assessments. And, your typical assessor in the early 2000s was a hard hat, a clipboard, a Polaroid camera, and a light meter. Mm-hmm. And you were technologically savvy at that time. And I kept asking myself, even then, because we had Microsoft Word was just coming out, or the early versions of Word. I'm like, why can't we do our reports in Word? Why do we have to do them, stubby pencil? Why can't we add photos, and things? So that led to 2003 and the development of a software that I created called Pair PM, Process for Assessing Infrastructure Risk Project Management. And we took the best of quality management and project management and risk assessment and rolled it up into SharePoint. And from there, we developed another several versions as technology improved, we improved. And it allowed us to have the conversation with folks regarding, how to really look at security programs. It enabled the conversation because, you need data to make decisions, right? So we were able to capture that data and refine that data and produce that data in a fashion that was business friendly. Prior to 2009, having a conversation with another security professional about business process and security was impossible. What do I need to know
Right.
that for?
Right.
I'm a security guy, right? Fortunately for me, I had come up through engineering and project management and quality management and all these other things that the military had exposed me to. And then couple that with what I had learned in physical security and security application and security systems and design and all these things. And I started asking myself, why aren't we incorporating business process into security?
Mhm.
And I heard the same thing over and over from different security professionals. Oh, I can't get budget for my program. Why can't you get budget for your program? Well, they don't value me, right? And that's when it started hitting me that we were not quantifying what security did.
Mhm.
And then in 2009, organizational resilience management came out. And then later, enterprise security risk management came out. Our software had developed to a point that we actually partnered with another company, and we're now partnered with a company called Circadian Risk. And
Mhm.
they have their product is amazing. They've incorporated a lot of our thinking into their product for a much better product, but it's all AI driven. It's all business driven, right?
Mhm.
So we're able to take that data now that was kind of useless before, and now we can convert that data into business objectives and business strategy that a security manager, a CSO, a senior security executive can now take 1 or 2 pages right in the software into the C suite and make the business case for their
Mhm.
progress and what it is that they provide to fulfilling the strategy of the organization. And that's security's purpose. Security doesn't exist for security's sake. Security exists to enable the strategy of the organization, the strategy of the enterprise, and help the enterprise avoid strategic risk.
Right.
Right? That's so, your security program needs to be tied to the strategic risk. And then once we minimize or eliminate strategic risk, it allows the enterprise to thrive and prosper and do what it is that they do. Right? And now we've got all this great data
Mhm.
that we didn't have. Systems are integrated. 15 years ago, we were talking about convergence, right? Folks, we're converged, right? Every physical security device now is part of IoT. It's part of the IT background, and it
Mhm.
is a data producing device, right? So how do we take that data and incorporate it and extract what we need from it and subject it to a process and then refine that data to solve business problems? Well, to do that now, we're relying on AI and we're relying on robotics and we're relying on many other tools, machine learning to produce that information, that valuable information that's always been there over the last, 8 years, but we didn't know how to grab it, right? Now we know how to grab it, how to distill it, and how to work with it. And the rapidity, the speed at which we are progressing in the realm of AI and machine learning and robotics is just absolutely amazing. It's mind-boggling.
It is, yeah, and I can appreciate what you're saying. I mean, I've been a seller in the industry up until I just released my company the whole time, and so I can appreciate being able to formulate a business case and removing oneself as a security operator from the drudgery of a cost center, of the feeling of being a burden, to being a strategic value person and department within an organization. And like you're articulating, a lot of it is getting the data, but it's formulating your position. It's almost changing your stance and the things that were always with you. You just didn't know how to get it. You didn't know how, and once you got it, you didn't know what to do with it. And you're right. I mean, the technology, even like AI, is producing patterns, really uncovering the diamonds in the rough that we couldn't see. We couldn't see the forest through the trees, so to speak. Right. So, like, I think there's a lot you said there, and I can appreciate even the journey into technology leading up until today. Like you said, the robotic stuff that brings us to this point in this conversation is insane. I mean, there's things that are happening today that we didn't think what could have happened 6 months ago, and it's just so evolving. And so, with that, I'd love to start off, Jeff, by talking about just understanding robotics, right? So, first is the foundations of it. So how do we define a robot, and how do humanoid robots different from like a functional robot or functional robots?
Well, robots have been around for years. It's nothing new. We've been using robots in manufacturing for over 3 decades, right? They first entered in mostly in the automotive industry, and where repetitive tasks needed to be done. Where a SCADA system, supervisory control and data acquisition, managed a robot that had a single function. It picked something up off a conveyor, turned it 90 degrees. Another robot came and did a manipulation, and then it passed it off to another robot, and we had these production lines. So robots have been around for years. But the biggest problem I see is when people think about robotics, they're not thinking about AI and machine learning. Where they default to is the TV version of a robot, the movie version of a robot,
Hmm.
the science fiction robot.
Hmm.
And that may at some time, that type of humanoid robot is near horizon. I mean, there's some that
Hmm.
are out there now that are highly functional.
Hmm.
But the majority of robotics and the tools that operate them, okay, AI and machine learning, that's, and maybe I don't know, do you want a common definition of AI and machine learning? I mean, I can work with that if you like.
Yeah, it's up to you. I mean, I think the audience, sometimes we get new listeners, we've had old listeners. I think it's always good, and it's good to hear it from our guest's perspective also, right? Because that helps me understand like where you're coming from. Should I
Sure.
should I need
So
to,
so
based on the
let's
things you're
let's
saying?
talk about that for a minute then. Um, AI has become intrinsic in our life. We don't realize it, right? AI is a means of gathering and learning from data, right? So if you have an Alexa device, if you have a smartphone, whatever brand, you can talk to it now. You can ask it questions. We have things like Copilot and Chat GPT that are perfect examples of AI, right? So if I go to my Alexa device and I say, Alexa, I want to build a shopping list. And I tell Alexa, Alexa, I need a dozen eggs, I need a gallon of milk, and I need 3 pounds of flour. Can you send that for fulfillment? Yes, Jeff. And then 3 days later or 2 days later, it shows up on my front doorstep because the order has been processed and fulfilled. That's AI. Machine learning is when I place that order and I say I need milk, eggs, and flour, that Alexa would come back to me and say, Jeff, the last time you ordered milk, eggs, and flour, you were baking a cake. Do you need
Hmm.
butter too? That's machine learning, right? The machine has learned from my behavior what it is that I require. We experience every day different aspects of AI and machine learning. You sit and make a search for something online. You search for several things, and then AI coupled with machine learning says, "Oh, you've looked at these things. Do you want this too?" You know,
Recommendation systems.
right? So it's just amazing the level of intelligence and the suggestions that come out. Now let's take that and parse that into the physical security industry, right? You got door controllers, access control systems, visitor management systems, video cameras, barrier systems, lighting, building automation systems that turn on lights, turn on HVAC, and all of those are data producing devices. What happens when we take that data and we subject it to AI and machine learning, right? So I'm Jeff, and I'm in a human resources process at my company. I'm going through a hostile divorce, and I've been taking a lot of Fridays and Mondays off,
Hmm.
right? And because I'm spending too hard of a weekend, and I'm on the bubble. And one day I come into the office at midnight, but normally nobody would know I was there because there's no correlation of the data. But if we apply AI and machine learning to it, I scan my badge at a door and I enter a door. The camera AI and the analytics pick me up in the hallway. It follows me to the office space that I enter. The building automation system kicks on because the lights now come on in my office. And it says I'm in that office from midnight to 3 a.m. when I exit. Now, ordinarily, that might not even get picked up because people don't monitor their feeds, regardless of what system they're using. Whether it's a Linnell or Genetec or whatever it is, they don't watch the feeds. But now I've got this complex AI and machine learning that sends a message to somebody that says, "Hey, Jeff's normal work hours are 7 to 4. He was in at midnight. He accessed the building at this time." It may not be something incriminating, but it may be an opportunity for a conversation. I may have been in the building to catch up on work because I know I'm on a bubble and I'm trying to make a good impression and get caught up on stuff. I couldn't sleep. I had access to the building, thought I was going to go in and do a little bit of extra work, right? Or maybe I'm up to something more nefarious and I'm downloading client data that I intend to take with me when I exit. But in either case, without the AI and machine learning and the collation of this data, folks wouldn't know what I was doing. And now we know.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, it definitely is commonplace. It's everywhere. It's anywhere. Right. Yeah. I'd love to get to the science fiction aspect of the robotic space, right? So the first thing is like hitting on this perception versus reality. And I think about humanoids a lot because it seems the most personal. It's something that people have a reflection to themselves as the things that they've been taught, in the movies is like Terminator, right? So there's like there's immediate relation to it because it has the phalanges in the head and everything, but then there's also some fear and there's a lot going on. If you're anybody following the robotics space, there's a lot of development and focus between some major companies and some startups. And so with that, so how or why do humanoid robots often feel like science fiction, and what functional robots are a reality in industries today? And we could even use our industry as an example.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of functional robots that aren't necessarily humanoid that serve a purpose in the security industry, right? I mean, I go back to, gosh, almost 10 years ago. There was a company, I won't name the company. They took what looked like an old bomb squad track vehicle, mounted a camera on it, and used it with a control pad and joysticks to move it around a complex. And that was the latest technology at that time. Today, we have autonomous robotics. They're capable of following a GPS pattern, just like a drone. I mean, a drone is a form of robotics if you think about it, right? You put a drone in the air, you mark out a path on your smart device, and the drone follows that path and automatically returns to its point of origin because it's utilizing geolocation and very smart analytics to find itself, right, and locate itself, right? So I mean, it's as simple as that. But COVID was a very interesting genesis for robotics because robots don't get sick, they don't miss work, they don't take time off, they don't need overtime, they're switched on 24/7, they have no human resource problems,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You don't have to go through a hiring process, and they're cost efficient. So it's not that we are utilizing these types of robotics to replace human beings. We're utilizing them to help human beings to be more efficient and to repurpose human beings to more sentient, thinking, analytical roles than just standing in a lobby, staring at a door, waiting for somebody to come in. So there are robotics now that can monitor a lobby, wall-mounted robotics, right? It's not humanoid, right? It's wall-mounted, and it's capable of processing a credential, doing visitor management, utilizing video to analyze a person's height, weight, temperature, everything else, right? And a lot of this started. I don't know. You play? Do you do gaming at all?
Yes.
All right. Did you have an Xbox?
Yes. All of them,
All right. So you
including the
remember
newest one right now.
you remember the camera that was coupled with an Xbox that you could use for
Oh yeah.
workouts and exercise? I turned
I
that.
never bought that, but I do know exactly what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
I turned it off after a day.
Oh yeah. It was
Well,
just
I figured if
going crazy.
you could see me, somebody else could see it,
Oh
and so
yeah.
it was spooky to me. I unplugged it and turned it off. But that was a very very early form of robotics. It sensed your presence by looking for your IR heat signature, right? It could tell your shape, your outline, it could detect some of your bodily functions based on your body heat and how engaged you were. And it was just amazing tech back at the time. But now you look today and you look at the AI and robotics that are in cameras, that are in wall-mounted units, that are operating gate controllers, that are interfacing with people. We worked with one client that had 48 lobby guards around the country, and those lobby guards were 24/7. You know,
So probably three shifts
Yeah,
then.
3 shifts,
Yeah.
24/7, 168 hours a week, getting paid about, the guard was getting paid in the low 20s depending upon the location, but the fully burdened wage was more like about $48 an hour, and we were able to repurpose those 48 lobby guards with 48 wall-mounted robotic units that cost about $3 an hour to operate.
Oh yeah. Especially, and I agree with what you were saying before, right? Because there's an aspect like when it's repetitive, when it's predictable, when it's something that is, is mundane in some cases. These things are a great fit. But what happens with those same guards is the next step is upskill, reskill. How do we take the talent that we have and find something more useful for them that only humans could do? And I like where you were going with this because you actually carried it into my next topic, which is exploring some of the benefits of this, right? And starting with efficiency being one of them, efficiency gains. You started giving me some examples. Would love to hear more, but basically, what are some of the key benefits of using robotics in the security roles compared to human personnel? So as you can see, this question is almost exactly in line with what you were just saying, which it sounds like the immediate one is cost is a big one, and they don't sleep, they don't have HR issues, but would love to expand more on those key benefits of using robots in security roles, again, compared to humans, human personnel.
And like we said, a robot is always switched on. It's
Hmm.
switched on to what it's programmed, right?
Hmm.
Programmed to observe,
Hmm.
right? So it doesn't get tired. You look at and let's just look at a TSA portal because that's easy enough for everybody to go through. A human being is capable of watching about 6 cameras at a time, all right? And they can only do it for about 20 minutes before they're distracted. right?
Hmm.
Their mind wanders to their cell phone, whatever problems are going on, to the environment around them. They have all these other distractions that are giving them input.
What other sports games going on? Maybe ESPN's pinging their phone.
Yeah.
Who knows?
So
Yep.
you watch a TSA portal, and what they do is they move people about every 20 minutes. They move them from the scanner to the magnetometer, from the magnetometer to a physical screener and wander, to a supervisory role overseeing everything. Right. So they keep moving people around that portal through the different functions that are going on in that portal so that they defeat the human boredom that sets in. A robot doesn't require that. All right. A robot doesn't get bored. It doesn't get distracted. It is single purpose, single focus, based on, or multiple focuses based on what it has been programmed to see. The other things is that human beings don't really multitask. We'd like to believe we multitask, but what we do is a series of single things very rapidly, right? We don't truly do things like that. And if you've ever been into a security operations center, right? You've got your desk. The operator has 3 screens in front of them. Then you've got your big view wall with 800 more cameras. And then you've got your side view wall with all your media, your national media, local media, everything so that people can monitor what's going on in real time. And at the same time, they're processing calls for service and 15 other functions because somebody comes into the SOC and says, "Oh, they're not doing anything. They're just sitting on the desk. Let's give them this additional task," right? So when you start looking at efficiency of a human being, that efficiency drops with each task they're given, right? And so I have done efficiency studies of SOCs where a human being spends 70% of their time doing things that could be done by technology, which distracted them from their primary purpose, which was monitoring the physical security system, right? So when we can take and incorporate robotics and AI and machine learning into that environment that allows the human to be more efficient. And let's just give an example of social media monitoring, right? I can sit here at my computer and I can spend all day looking for any mention of Jeff Slotnick on the internet,
Hmm.
right? Whether, I'm looking at Twitter, I'm looking at Truth Social, I'm looking at LinkedIn, I'm looking at Facebook, and all these different social media feeds that are out there. And I can physically search utilizing Boolean searches and deep dive searches and all these things to identify anytime my name is mentioned. That takes a lot of time, right? That's almost a full day's work right there. If I'm doing that, I'm not doing anything else in my life because the social media moves so rapidly through its cycle during the day. But we now have software that will do that. You
It's
know,
interesting. It's interesting on the journey, right? Because to me, it's like if anybody is even just questioning, like, oh, we're super manual and these things from our desk, I'm thinking, like, dude, you're already behind. It's like, get up, shape up, and make it happen. It's like if anybody, like, that's what one of the things that does concern me about the security industry, if I'm being honest, because a lot of times that I've heard, oh, we're 5 to 10 years behind the IT space. And I think a lot of that comes from like our own reluctance of just accepting the things because we're security minded, we play it safe. I get it for certain situations like utilities or critical infrastructures, or, there are certain situations that need a lot more hesitancy. But being in the industry for 13 years, one of the things I've seen outside of like some of the major industries has been the most of the client base is not those industries. They're small, medium businesses that need protection. They're commercial size companies that are private institutions. They're not running a power plant. They're not running, a major college campus. And so I think outside of those industries, I find that even in those industries, right? I think there's still an aspect of where there's a balance of appetite between these things. Like if I knew I was running a manual ship that was as such described, I would be, if I walked in as a leader, I would be like, man, maybe it's like Trump blaming Biden for all the mistakes. It's like, man, it was a previous administration. They were horrible. They made all the mistakes. I don't know. I feel like that'd be my approach because it's hard for me to accept that people are that way, and I know there's even still from, I use this example, and maybe you've seen this too, even regional banks. I remember this was probably 10 years ago, or maybe a little bit more. So it was some time ago where I went into a regional bank, and that regional bank used VCRs for their video surveillance system. So what they would do is every time the VCR would fill up, they replace the tape, and they had stockpiles of tapes. And I look at that and I'm like, man, it's maybe because we're from the industry and we look at that and we're like, that's crazy. And they don't value this stuff like we do. But in my mind, it doesn't even matter if it's cameras. It doesn't matter if it's my email system. Maybe it's being a technologist or liking technology. I can appreciate being not cutting edge necessarily is what I'm suggesting, but being up to date. You know, I wonder though sometimes in that sock example, people are still today staring at 150 screens and they're not using some camera system that's based on AI, much less even thinking about robotics, which is really today's discussion. It's insane to me, and it could just be because I'm a millennial and that's what I expect people just to figure it out. But
No,
I don't
but
know. Yeah.
you make a great point, and I think a lot is education, which is what we're engaged in today, right?
Hmm.
We're engaged in educating people to think differently. Right? We've all accepted technology, use technology in our daily life, whether it's getting in your car and using a backup camera that identifies traffic behind you and says, wait, stop, put on the brakes, or your car has haptic sensors that automatically do it for you, right? To your cellular phone. My cellular phone is so darn advanced. I'm sure I'm only using about 30% of it, right? I don't think I've ever used 100% of the capability of my cellular phone. But what we have to do is get in the mindset of imagining how do we take this technology that we've accepted in our daily lives and reimagine it for use in the workplace. And this is a lot of the projects that I've been engaged in over the last year. I'm working with an organization now, two organizations actually, on creating what I call a floating risk score, because risk is not static, right? We do a risk assessment every 2 years. But what if we had a continuously changing risk score based on a number of data points, right?
Hmm.
Whether that's local news, weather data, botnet searches, physical security cameras, physical security devices, cameras, building automation systems, which we talked about earlier, the building's purpose and function, right? So, is it an SOC? Is it a place where senior executives reside? Is it a research facility? Is it a warehouse? So, it has its own inherent risk based on the building function, right? And we take all these different feeds that create a score, and those scores feed into a programmable logic controller, right? That says, okay, your score right now is this. But now all of a sudden we have an active volcano that's nearby. And now all of a sudden that data feed comes in and the risk score jumps to this and says, you need to evacuate people, right?
That's pretty cool. I've never heard of that before. I mean, because that, like, when I think of like the IT team, they're graded on uptime a lot of times, right? Then you've got the sales team that's graded on their percentage to quota. Marketing's graded on their ability to generate leads, top funnel leads and brand aware equity. Then you got the security team that's graded on dot 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 something like this, and
And
that's
that's
pretty
and
cool.
that's where we've
Yeah,
been working over the last couple of
neat.
years is
Hmm.
developing those key performance indicators, those metrics, applying efficiency studies to corporate security programs to say this is where technology can assist you. I mean, it's in some cases, and you asked a question. I walked into an SOC several years ago, and their technology stack was 9.5 years old. They had a person whose sole function was to patch and update that system. And when I asked the security manager, why don't they update their system, their technology stack? So, well, we can't get funding. We produce a budget. They cut our budget. And what we realized is they weren't valued. So what we did is we did a full efficiency study. We identified everybody that was a client of that SOC services. We measured the cost of what it is, of the value of the service they were providing. We also evaluated the cost to provide the service. And we said, okay, this is where you're at today. This is where you could be. This is the zero-based study, right? And the cost savings that if you implement these things where you can be. Now, how do we get you your funding? And what we did is we tied every function that they engaged in to the strategic risk of the organization. And they said, okay, and we found out that their HR department was already doing an internal chargeback. And we said, instead of working on a line item budget, we want you to do an internal chargeback for your services. So that's going to serve two things. One, people are now going to be aware of what it is you do and what it costs to do it. But they're also going to be aware of the value and benefit that you bring to the table and what it is that you're actually providing the corporation. You're no longer just an entity over here that's a service provider. Now they understand the value of the service that you're providing. And they ended up with more budget than they knew what to do with. They were able to upgrade their entire system, hire new people, bring in new tech. I also had a similar situation, but I had a very reluctant security manager. And I was doing my best to help this person to see the light,
Mm-hmm.
and they just weren't getting it. And at the end of the day, I looked at the person. I said, well, and this was back a few years. I said, what type of cell phone do you have? Said, well, I have an iPhone 10. I said, great. I want to swap you for an iPhone 4S. I can't do that. I depend on my phone. It has these functions, this, that, and the other. And I looked at him. I said, your technology stack is an iPhone fest and an iPhone 10 world.
Yeah, and that was going back to some stuff I was talking about before, right? I think people, take innovation rules the planet. And in this case with AI, here's one of the things I came to an understanding with. There's a lot of emotions around AI and the development of taking jobs, which I want to get into the human impact as the next topic, okay? Around robotics and stuff. I think obviously we want to root for people, clearly, because that's who we are. But I think at the same time, there are forces at play that are much bigger than me and most certainly the entire security industry combined. This is probably a $10 billion industry. That is peanuts. That's like a daily expense for the IT industry. So, and if you're watching the news and you're paying attention to the AI investment that's happening right now, even in the increase in capabilities in these robotics, it's a real thing. And so in my mind, I think it's almost a waste of energy to when we look at the spectrum of like danger to opportunity. I don't mean to be an opportunity. It's not what I'm saying. But find some healthy balance in between danger because that's what we do as people that keeps us safe. Also, the customers that we serve, right? It keeps consideration for them and their interests. But opportunity because it keeps us open-minded to the possible, and that the fact that this big tech with the trillions of dollars that they have and the top talent in the world that they are calling the shots. And I think that once I came to that belief, I was like, dude, facts, then I'm going to align myself with them because I want to be relevant and I want my family to be relevant over years to come. And that wasn't the big reason why to start an AI company or even this podcast. But I think what I hope for the industry is that we rise to a similar belief system to say like we're just along for the ride and our job is to keep ourselves and the businesses and the organizations we serve in our interest as we work through this industrial revolution, perhaps the fifth one or whatever, but not pushed against it. And so, but there are some things to push against it, which brings us to the next topic, which is the human impact and specifically human displacement. So, Jeff, are robots replacing humans in security jobs, or are they filling gaps created by labor shortages?
Well, it's yes, all of the above. Look, as law enforcement has seen a great resignation,
Yeah.
so has security, right?
Yep.
Security, especially, human guarding industry, right, is not the most glamorous or well-paid industry, right? So, do I want to sit in an office for $21 an hour and answer a phone and be a desk concierge or whatever? Or do I want to stand post, in a transit center, with all the street crime and dealing with unhoused people and everything else that put me at risk? It becomes a risk-based question. If I can earn the same money, right, doing this soft job versus doing this hard job that puts me at risk and oftentimes for less pay, uh, it's a tough industry. It's always been a tough industry. It is not unusual for a guarding company to see 60 to 70% turnover annually. The cost of hiring a human being, and we calculated this, it was about 8, 9 years ago, because we actually looked at, we were researching creating a security officer academy, right? But we determined, after interviewing, some of the larger security firms, we determined it costs at that time about $7,500 to put a guard in a uniform on the street. So from the time the advertisement is put in the paper till a person submits an application, the application is reviewed, the person is interviewed, they're put in a training program and accepted, they're given all the human resource processes for onboarding, right? Trained for the post that they're going to be on, and put on the street, and the street level training that they receive for their specific post. It's actually very spendy. It's not, it's not what you would think. And we found out that it
And
was
the turnover is also really high too, which
what's
makes
and
that $7,500 for naught almost.
right, because now you've got this individual that you invested $7,500 in to hire, and now this person turns around and finds another job that pays 25 cents an hour more, and leaves one job for another and interviews for that job and gets onboarded there. So, when you've got that much turnover and that much cost of employment, there's got to be an answer to dealing with human shortage. And we have found that with a lot of our clients, that major guard contracts are only being staffed to 65% of requirements, right? They require 100%. That's what they contracted for. And what they're getting is 65% because the companies can't hire enough people. And then, you compound that. I mean, one agency that we know, actually, instead of hiring one single company, what they did is they took their guard force needs and they broke them down into three different spheres: static, post, patrols, and another. And they hired one company for each. So that they didn't suffer that understaffing, right? So each company was hired for a primary function, but with the ability to cross over to one of the other functions if the other company couldn't fulfill their requirements.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's what I'm also hearing between the lines is what you're saying is that people inadvertently in these roles have created their own destiny of replacement because they quit for 25 cents more. They're not focused. They want to take the soft job versus the hard job, which probably means there's a lot more soft jobs that have stocked up over time. Um, and they've also probably, and this is not to offend anyone, I think there's also some argument to say that when they're in those soft jobs, they're really not challenging themselves on a consistent basis. It's quiet for long periods of time. Your brain is looking at your cell phone and you're looking at social media reels. And I have family that's in corrections. And let me tell you, they're on their phones like all the time. And so, like, at least from that for them, right? And that to me is like a concern, right? Because if I'm not constantly challenging myself to get better, like I'm not improving as a person. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. So I think there's some respects that they've almost done that to themselves, but at the same time, the way the that space has been set up has done that to them. So it's like this problem, right? So meaning that the way the guard space has been, and we've over time have not innovated maybe to supply them. We have as far as like the things that are bolted on the walls, but giving them tools earlier on to have them adopt, and maybe having customers adopt these new AI tools to allow them to become not just a guard, but a manager of robots, to get them ready for this next phase, right? So I think it's almost, and I don't expect that they're going to step up to the occasion because they're making $20 an hour or whatever, and they're on their cell phones all day. If they were going to step up to the occasion, they probably wouldn't act that way. And so what I do expect though is that at least in part the organizations that see the robotics that's accelerating in interest and in development, that they start to enable those workforces to say we want to elevate. But also the companies that supply these guards too probably have even a bigger influence to say like we know what's coming, and we understand that it's 50% turnover, and they don't find fulfillment in their roles, and they're not performing. That's all creates all kinds of problems. You spend $7,500 in order to get these guys on board, so there's all kinds of negatives. And so that what happens is now we get them ready for the next step. And you mentioned something in what you were saying too about the Great Resignation. So I'd like to touch on a little bit more. I thought that was really interesting. How has the Great Resignation accelerated the adoption of robotics in the industry that we serve?
Well, business is not going to fail. Business
Mm,
needs to maintain production,
yeah,
profitability, all those different things that businesses need to show value for their stakeholders, right? Whether that's a publicly traded company or a small firm, they have to produce whatever it is they produce, even if it's a government. A government produces services, right? And so if we can't produce those services efficiently, then we lose market share. We lose value. People will get frustrated with our product. They don't buy our product. They don't come into our stores because they don't want to deal with things. I mean, look, Amazon is just amazing, right? You know, I used to go to a store, to do a project on my house. I'd buy a tool, I'd buy some attachments for it, I'd buy some construction materials, and I'd come home, I'd inevitably forget something and have to go back, or I'd discover something I need. Now I get on Amazon. I don't have to deal with a human being. I don't have to deal with a cashier. I don't have to walk through a store and locate what it is that I need or find a human to assist me in identifying the item that I need. And even today, I just went into a store the other day. It was a food store, right? And I said, "You've got this item on sale. This is what I'm looking for." It took three human beings to locate the item and get it to me, right? I go
it's
on
not
it.
the experience you expect, right? You expect them to figure it out. It's funny you mentioned that because I thought about that recently because I'm building some prototypes of some things right now. And the one thing I thought about is when I call into customer service and they start reading scripts
I hate it.
and they're not listening to me. They're not trying to solve my problem. They're trying to take me through their triage steps. And that is so annoying. So what I thought about was like, hey, AI can shortcut that whole thing. Not only will it listen to my words to understand my context and to understand what I'm trying to do, but it'll have the most optimized route in order to solve that. So I don't care if I'm talking to a person, at least for the sake of the example of customer service. I'm calling because I have a problem. I need it resolved because I got other stuff to do. So if I'm going through your triage steps or you're taking me through worst case, like a script, now going back to your point, that you had to get through three people to solve the problem when the AI, if you're a customer coming into to do something, the company can develop the AI in order, and you know this, but the audience might not. The company can develop the AI in order to orchestrate you wherever you need to go, because it can work off that let's just call it an unforeseen scenario in a lot of cases. Now there are some cases where we build these things, or they call it conversational orchestration, where we can force the customer down a path of where they need to go. But then the generative AI allows it to be a little bit more autonomous in that and catering to that. So, man, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, I
Completely spot
mean,
on.
but what you need is a well-programmed AI, and you need a lot of market knowledge, and you
Hmm.
need some very
Yes.
smart people that can identify all the potential scenarios and program that into an AI. And that starts with data collection, right?
Hmm.
So it is a very interesting conversation when we start looking at that, and getting back to my Amazon fulfillment. I get on my iPad, I get on my cell phone, I get on my computer, I select the item that I want. Oh yeah, this is exactly what I want. Not only can I get it, but I can read the reviews and what other people think about it, because all the opinions on it are crowdsourced. Oh, look, this has 46,000 5-star reviews. I think this is the product I want, and I select it for fulfillment, and it comes to my house the next day. It arrives, I've got it, I open it up, I look at it, and you know what? It's not what it promised to be. I can box it up and I can send it right back. It'll get picked up, or I can drop it off at the local UPS store and pick another item. It's a great experience that they've developed. And I think when we start looking at organizations that are actively utilizing machine learning, AI, robotics, and how they're utilizing them, and then reimagine that for our industry, right? That's when we start seeing the value. And you were talking about human displacement. So we're not really displacing humans.
So on that note, I love that where you're going because I would love to talk about the strengths of humans too in that. So in that is, and you might answer the specific question that I have, but just for the marker of the chapter, would love to talk about the strengths of humans. But you seem like you were starting to go there, so I'll let you finish and then maybe ask a question later. Yeah,
Look, humans are smart,
yeah,
but we're really smart.
yeah, absolutely.
There are a number of descriptors that you can use: observant, cunning, smart, intelligent,
Empathetic,
responsive,
loving.
empathetic. You know, these are all things that are almost uniquely human that we can never replicate with a robot. You can't, at this point in time in robotics, we cannot teach empathy to a robot. That's something uniquely human. Emotion is uniquely human, right? So human, I mean, I go back to, my early Star Trek days, and Mr. Data, right? He so badly wanted to have emotion, to be able to feel what it was like to be a human being. And robots are the same way. They're analytical. They're machines. They do what they're programmed to do by a human. So you can't have robotics without having humans. Somebody has to program the AI, somebody has to program the machine learning, somebody has to do the research as to what we want this device to do. Human beings are very good at that. Human beings can manage robots, right? They can manage tools. We do it all the time, right?
Mhm.
So, interaction, that human involvement, human discernment, human emotion, human analytical capability, those are all multidimensional things that make up the human condition, right? That can never be replaced by a robot.
Yeah, because I feel like it's really the perception of rather than the actual, and I'll explain what I mean. To me, it seems this way, right? So, for example, if we look at empathy, like empathy is understanding. How do I express empathy? I ask questions. It's the difference between sympathy, right? But I ask questions, I seek to understand your perspective. I help you express your perspective. I might help you see through to your perspective if I'm a leader to empower you to do something that you're passionate about. And a robot could certainly ask questions, and a certain robot could certainly understand what you're trying to do. A robot could certainly give you advice on how to see through your vision. However, I think the difference is the perception of the person that's getting that empathy, right? Because I don't think we're certainly not at the place. I don't think so, and this is my opinion, but maybe different strokes for different folks. That if you were to ask advanced voice mode in AI, which it can do right now, and give you some sense of this synthetic empathy, that you would talk to it and say, "This thing really understands me. Thank you, OpenAI. You're like my best friend. This I can't wait to talk to you today." Like there's a vibration that doesn't exist that only like humans feel between humans. So even though the tech can produce better results of empathy in this respect of like the objective of listening and recommending and supporting all of that, but what it can't do is pick up the perception of the actual human to say that this is empathy. Like how I define empathy is that it's provided by a human, right? And so I think like that's the difference. Now I wonder though, and this is getting pie in the sky a little bit, but as humanoid robots take more and more shape of people, will people start to bridge that gap over time? More like if they get a robot that becomes, a kid that grows up, and this thing turns into their tutor in their home, and this kid grows up and it from the beginning fostered it's their relationship, because it's not normal for prior generations, but for children that grow up with these things, in their home one day, that's teaching them and that's spending time with them and all this other stuff, which is a little uncomfortable to think about, because we want to do that as people. That's what we value. But I wonder though, over time, that perception of empathy, which is a human trait today that we accept as humans, that yes, this is true, will adjust based on generational experiences with robotics.
You know,
Because it does. You know
I
what I mean?
I can't even begin to think about that because,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
understand where
yeah,
you're going with that,
yeah,
but
yeah.
that's going to take, look, at some point in the future, 20 years from now, 40 years from now,
Mm,
will new chipsets be developed that are capable of emulating human empathy?
hmm.
I'm sure
Right.
but the thing is, at the end of the day, in my opinion, an AI can how to respond to different behaviors based on behaviors it's been programmed to observe and receive. But it isn't true empathy. It's repeating what it knows, right? It's repeating what it's learned. It's not really true emotion.
And that's what I was basically more questioning, right? Not necessarily the technology of where it could go, but defining empathy as we understand it. Like empathy is a human connection, right? It's a human to human thing, right? So I think, but the idea is what we feel. Like if I'm receiving on the receiving end, I wonder as time progresses and if robotics become a commonplace in households. Obviously this is a future take, right? This is obviously not current state. Is would our belief around empathy adjust? I don't know. So it's definitely a longer
That's
term
that's so
thinking.
far. That's for your generation, brother. You're gonna have
But
to
hey,
figure that one out. Uh,
yeah. Yeah, we cover everything from current state to future state, which speaking of, that brings us to our last section, which is a future outlook, right? So let's talk a little bit about that. And that usually helps probably for me to mention that so that way we put our future hats on rather than our current state hats on. So from a future state, like a future outlook, when we think of technology advancements, what advancements in AI and robotics do you think will impact the physical security industry, let's say in the next 5 to 10 years?
oh gosh,
Yeah.
there's so many robotic assistance devices is just blossoming in the new tech they're putting out. Every 30 to 60 days they're putting out a new software, a new tech, a new device, or an old device with new capabilities. So 4.0, 5.0, 6.0, and just watching them and how they're developing. To understand your future, look at your past, right? 6 years ago, gunshot detection, firearms detection was a fantasy. It was something that somebody had produced in a lab somewhere, that was given to several companies that actually developed it, marketed it, and put it out on the street. Today, I can take any modern camera, I can upload a weapons detection AI
Hmm.
that melds with my analytics that can detect a firearm in somebody's hands, right? Whether it's a handgun, a long gun, a baton, a different type of weapon, it can identify that now. So you probably know I'm very passionate about school security. Why do we have to wait for a violent action to occur in a school before we respond? Why don't we take the integrated technology that we have today, right?
Hmm.
This is what we have today, that I can take a blue light pole
Hmm.
with an intelligent camera
Hmm.
that has analytics on it,
Hmm.
that's integrated with my access control system, my enunciation system, my messaging system, and all the other systems, so that when somebody is in a parking lot and the camera observes someone removing a firearm from a vehicle, it calls 911, it sends a message, creates a lockdown, locks all the entry doors, and geolocates the person where they are at and sends that information for response force. We're still doing detection, delay, and response, but we're doing it much further out. We're doing it at the extreme end of the perimeter instead of waiting. That capability exists today. So you look at how firearms detection has developed and evolved over the last 4 to 5 years. And you imagine where it's going to be in 10 years. Look, 10 years ago, we weren't even talking about integrated systems. We were still doing CC.
Yeah, the industry is kind of horrible. It's a good example of where we are because that's where we're at. But it's also thinking like, I mean, to me, people don't rise to low expectations, and I feel like the industry has set that expectation. So like if I'll give you an example. So I look at the IT space and the stuff that I had known we were talking about that we're now talking about the security industry, I knew like a year and a half ago already, but it was like a normal conversation. And so my mind, it's like, well, because what happens with generative AI is it now democratizes AI development more so than when it was machine learning, which was very manual. I'll use a great example is Boston Dynamics, right? Boston Dynamics should be crushing the robotic space, and they're not. They're not. They spent years developing on the machine learning side, right? Where they were pushing robots around, learn how to play soccer, like old school aspects. And generative AI shows up, and all of a sudden, all of these robotics companies come out of the woodwork that are doing a lot of more advanced things. Not that Boston Dynamics is out of the picture. I'm just saying that they should be like leaps and bounds because everyone's known them as this advanced robotics company, right? I think they're doing good with the quadrupeds and stuff like that. But my only concern is that the future outlook, if I was to say, well, this is where we were, I would say the acceleration is going to be unlike anything that anyone's seen or could expect. And I'll give you an example. So I thought that even the use of human robotics was certainly going to be far-fetched until they develop a world AI model, which basically understands 3D space. And that this whole idea of AGI or artificial general intelligence was basically mastering language or some aspects of STEM, like mathematics, things like that. But it didn't master the physical world, which is a whole nother situation. And so you look at companies like Tesla that probably has some of the most amount of this 3D space data, right,
Mhm.
and vision models, and that they have an opportunity to feed that AI into their own systems, whether it's Grok or whatever they're using. And so I think it wasn't until maybe a couple months ago that NVIDIA released the first world model called Digits. And then not only that, but the compute's actually way more impressive in development speed than it has been the AI itself. So like the hardware that NVIDIA has built is now they're building a supercomputer that's like the size of a bridge for like $3,000, for example. And so to have something like that, and even if we take a step to have something like that on a world model that can live on the device is absolutely insane. Even taking a step further, Helix. Have you heard about Helix?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, so Helix is the robot model that was made by Figure, which is more of a startup robotics company. BMW brought them in their plants and stuff like that. They're putting vision language models or VLMs on these devices, and the parameters are small enough to live on the device. They're only like 7 billion and one second one's like 8 million. But the point that I'm making is like that stuff a handful of years ago was never going to be seen. But as the technology increases and as AI starts to do some of the research for us and programming, AI is programming right now, not fully, but there's aspects of there's a company called Vibe Coding that you could just talk to your computer and it'll make games, right? It'll program like almost end to end, like it's basic level right now. But what it does is it shows the acceleration that we've seen just in a few years because of generative AI and advancements in compute. So when I think going back to robotics, that before when I was like, well, dude, this could take super long. I got to build a world AI model. Then all of a sudden you see world AI model show up and that, NVIDIA using, a lot of the other things I don't need to get into to build the advancements. It's actually something that now I'm just like even more open-minded to think like anything's possible. Now, whether or not the security industry can adopt it, I don't know. I think I wonder sometimes if one of big tech has to come in our space for us to adjust faster. But
But
it's happening on the West Coast.
big tech is in our space. There's a couple things I'd like to talk about here. One
Yeah, yeah,
is everybody is using the buzzword. You go to ISC West, you go to
yeah,
ISGSX,
yeah,
you go to any of the major shows, everybody is advertising AI. So the first thing we have to learn as consumers is to ask, what is your AI? Who programmed your AI? How is your AI? Not just accepting that, oh, it's got AI and it's the new buzzword, right? And I think what you're speaking about is going to be small adaptations over time. Rad did something that was just absolute genius this past week. And what brought it to mind is you were talking about the quadrupeds, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Quadrupeds are just a great example of a tool. It can go into remote spaces. It can be
Absolutely.
programmable. It's multi-floor. It can do stairwells and condos and all kinds of things, right? They made it into a four-wheel drive vehicle. They went and they put
Oh, I saw that. Yeah, yeah.
drive wheels on it that,
That thing's awesome, and it can stand up, stop.
yeah,
The
I mean,
It's
it
incredible.
just
Yeah,
a small adaptation over time because somebody was thinking and said, well, why does it have to be quadruped? Why can't we put wheels on it? Right. And of course, the Jetsons had wheels on their robots years ago. But you start looking at that, and I think the same thing applies in industry. It's going to be small adaptations. 4 years ago, I was concerned about Chat GPT. Today, I proof every article I write in Chat GPT, right? I write the article, I put it into Chat GPT and I say, rewrite this for me. Right. And I'm, oh, that's really good. I like that. Well, no, that's not exactly what I wanted to say, but it's learning my style over time. But what if we take security officers that produce a report and they do voice to text, and then they take and they cut and paste that into Chat GPT, that produces their final report that they actually submit. I mean, teaching report writing and what to capture in report writing has been a challenge for many security officers. But what now if we take a cell phone with a program that I can dictate my report to, and it says, okay, Jeff, what happened here? Right? And I describe it. Who was involved? What time did it occur? Right? And I input all those things, and then it generates a report for me. It's a time savings, it's an adoption of technology, it's an adaptation of an existing technology that's been repurposed for the security industry. And I think that is how we're going to see more and more engagement with AI and robotics in the industry as people become more aware of the capabilities of the tool set, right? Because everybody wants to make their job easier, right? Nobody wants to go back to the iPhone 4S.
no,
Everybody wants
I
an iPhone 16. Why do they want the iPhone 16? Because all the tools and capabilities. So the more we can make those tools and capabilities consumer friendly and bring them into the workplace and show people what the possibilities are. The the millennials and Gen Zers and everybody that says, "Oh, I really don't know how to use them in the workplace." They're going to shine, right? Because they can imagine the data sets. They look at what we do and say, "Man, that's kind of ignorant what you're doing. Have you ever thought about doing it this way?" And listening, right? And focus groups and listening to young folks who have grown up with technology. Going back to that robot human experience you were talking about a child growing up with tech, right? Our children today, you've grown up with tech, right? We do things today that were not even a concept 10 years ago. And not only are we doing them, we're doing them better, we're doing them faster, we're doing them smarter, and we're taking what we've learned and we're reapplying it in different spaces. I think the future for robotics and AI and machine learning, as chipsets improve, as adoption improves, as understanding improves, I think it's going to do nothing but grow. This is a growth industry that has exceptional promise for our industry, that has exceptional promise for society, and is going to close some of those gaps.
That's fair. I like the way you put that. I mean, and I definitely understand the iteration piece. I think a lot of it's like I think some of it though is bridging the talent into this space. And a lot of what I've seen in progression has candidly come from the West Coast. A lot of people that are building stuff that is newer, and they can it's it's one of those things where the tools exist and the ability to get from A to B is a lot easier than what it used to. And at some point, low code will be very commonplace. And as people teach these AIs, that will become more democratized over time, cheaper, right? More available. And so for sure, yeah. I mean, I think that was spot on. So let's carry us home here, Jeff,
Sure.
with this last question, and it's still continuation of the future outlook, but the vision for the future, right? So, how do you envision the balance between humans and robots in securing our world in decades to come? What's the balance?
You mean what percentage will be robots? What percentage will be humans?
However, you want to answer that.
It's
Could
interesting.
be their interaction. It could be anything. Yeah.
I,
Sorry.
I'm going to go. I'm going to ask you to look at the gaming industry.
Okay.
Right? You're a gamer, right? I play Xbox, right? I
Nice.
it's
We got to share our tags after the call. Then.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I play on Xbox, and every Xbox game that's developed, whether it's Fortnite, right? Fortnite, I think I hate it as a game, but the
Yeah.
innovation, the way they appeal to their consumer, and the ability for anybody to develop within the Fortnite construct. They have a set of tools that they've created. You can be a developer, you can get in there, you can develop your own aspect of Fortnite, you can get paid for it by people that utilize your software, are helping that game to develop, advance, and it's got a global following, right? As much as I dislike it, it's got a global following. And I can connect with my grandson on there, which is really,
That's awesome.
and we can talk
Yeah.
real time and we can
Yeah.
play, and he's in another state, another time zone, and but you look at the gaming industry and the tools the gaming industry has created for itself to evolve, right? We're not too far off from that in the application of AI, machine learning, and robotics, right? We are continuing to adapt and evolve. And I'm going to go back to the comment that I did before. Will robotics and AI ever outclass a human being? I don't think that'll ever happen. Can you measure how a tool is utilized? I don't know. That's a tough question to ask. I can say, I can look at other things. We used to cut down trees with a handsaw, and now I use a chainsaw, right? And I'm very good with a chainsaw. A chainsaw doesn't replace me, it doesn't define me, but it certainly helps me get my job done. And I think we are going to see, not, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to see this. I see AI, robotics, and machine learning as enablers of human function, to make human function more advanced, more refined, more focused, to provide tools that we don't necessarily have now to make better informed decisions. So I think it's going to be a symbiosis. I don't think it's going to be, robotics are here and humans are
Right.
here. I think
Two
robotics
different
are going to
classes, like you were
continue
saying.
to evolve, but human beings are going to evolve along with that based on this refined information that we're receiving to enable us to make those empathetic decisions that a robot can't make.
Yeah, I love that perspective. I mean, obviously in favor of humans to win this at all, but it's not winning if they're just tools. And like you said, they're not in our class. They don't serve the same purpose. They serve us first. And even all the big companies, even Elon saying like, "Hey, this is for humanity," right? That's at least that's the only future that I could picture. I couldn't picture. I don't want to picture anything else, right? I want to picture this symbiosis that you describe. I want to picture this abundance. I love to think about the future of where AI is doing all the stuff we didn't love to do. And I was actually on somebody else's podcast, and I think I've thought this, but never came out until then. But the way I think about AI is it does all the stuff that we hated doing, so we can focus on the things that we were meant to do as people. I mean, we didn't have these keyboards, Jeff, until like a couple hundred years ago or whatever it was, right? Or typewriters. And all of a sudden now this is somehow valuable, and that's what we do every day, right? It is certainly not the phones and texting. And for millennia as people, we've communicated verbally, or we've used body language. And what were we as creatures? We were in touch with nature. We were more spiritual. We were probably a lot more emotional. I mean, social media was supposed to, the pitch was to make us more connected, but we got less connected.
Yeah,
And so,
don't get me started on social media. Social media is just
yeah, yeah,
I love it
yeah.
and I hate it all at the same time,
Me too. Yeah, yeah,
because what it does is it has eliminated critical thinking.
yes.
We create echo chambers that reflect our views and reinforce what we already know, does not expose us to divergent thinking, diverse thinking, and the ability to understand and have empathy towards another person's point of view. I may not agree with 99% of the things that someone has to say, but we may find a point of agreement on 1%. Is where we start. That's where we start the conversation. That's where we start as human beings to engage. And my fear is that all Facebook and Twitter and Truth Social and all these other things that are out there have become shouting matches, right?
Hmm.
And nobody's listening. Everybody's shouting and nobody's listening.
Yeah.
And I really think we need to get back into what you and I are doing. This
Hmm.
art of conversation.
Hmm.
Let's understand each other. Let's take time to listen, to be empathetic, to create understanding between people, because it's not all black and white. It's not all the way over here and it's not all the way over there. It's somewhere in here. And this is where the majority of us live. And we really need to have that conversation.
I love it. The paradoxical nature of humanity and the universe makes life interesting. I hate it if it's always black and white, right? And because I think it makes it less fun. And there's aspects of the gray that make it exciting sometimes. Jeff, this has been awesome. You have officially taken the trophy as the longest podcast that I've ever had. So congratulations. But I've really enjoyed to have this conversation with you. This is some of why I do it, to get to know our guests, to let our audience to get to know our guests. You're certainly a gem in the industry, and I've enjoyed the conversation and hope to obviously keep them up. But yeah, appreciate you joining.
Let's visit again sometime.